in every one. 2 weeks ago, when we had the Japanese delegation come in, he started it in the Oval, and then we took them into the negotiating room. So he laid the groundwork.
It looks like the tariffs don't work crowd owes President Trump a big apology. Tariff revenue just smashed records. $15.9 billion collected so far this month alone. The White House says it's close to a trade deal, but in the meantime, the money is starting to roll in. Hello, everyone. I'm Jackie DeAngelis. Joining me are my co-hosts Taylor Riggs, Dagan McDowell, Brian Brenberg, and with us for both hours today, O'Leary Ventures Chairman Kevin O'Leary. Great to have you, as always. And the president could be putting all that tariff money to work. He says Americans making under $200,000 a year could see their income taxes slashed or even wiped out. Imagine that. Washington politicians funding tax cuts without borrowing from China. And while doomsdayers scream about trade wars, companies like IBM are responding by announcing a $150 billion investment right here at home. We're talking about jobs, technology, manufacturing, all in America. And grocery chains like Albertsons are telling suppliers don't even think about jacking prices up. They're holding the line for consumers. Investors wait for progress on the big fish, that's China. Kevin, you say it is time to level the playing field, so I want to get your take.
Yeah, China's a different stack than all the other countries listed there because there's many issues beyond just tariffs. I've been saying consistently now for weeks, and I'm happy to see this is getting some traction. I'm not the only voice on this. IP theft, we've got to deal with that. World Trade Organization's disputes, we have to start clearing the backlog there because many of them are U.S. disputes and they've never been answered. Access to their courts, got to deal with that. They have access to ours. The one that's really starting to look interesting that we should be focusing on, this issue around Nasdaq and the New York Stock Exchange, there are hundreds of Chinese companies that are no longer compliant. And with the new sheriff in town, with Paul Atkins, he's a China hawk. He's going to go line item by line item through those listings. If they are breaching the rules of the exchanges by not being compliant with GAAP, delistorama, right off the exchange. And once you get delisted off a U.S. exchange, it's not so easy to go anywhere else in the world and say, hey, I broke the law in the U.S., please list me on the London exchange. They say, no thanks, no thanks. So they got to resolve these issues el pronto. Otherwise, they're going to lose billions of market cap just erased off the U.S. exchanges. And I'm good with all of it. Let's get to the table and start talking every one of these issues and the tariffs. This time, China, you don't get away with the IP theft.
Yeah. And this morning, Scott Bess and Brian talking about the potential for deals with different countries that have come to the table. We've got a full screen: Taiwan, Israel, Argentina, UK, EU, Japan, Vietnam, South Korea. The big one is India. We're going to probably start to hear some announcements pretty soon, it sounds like.
I would love to hear an announcement on India fast. I think that would send a huge shot across the bow for China, basically saying the U.S. wants to shift the center of gravity to India, away from China. That's why we're cutting a deal with them soon. But I like the sound of these other countries on the screen. Last week, at the end of the week, the Trump administration said, we've got a new kind of system for doing the tariff deals. Every week, we're gonna bring in 6 countries for talks, then go to 6 the next week, then go to 6 a week after on kind of a rotating basis. I wish that would have been in place, like a month ago, but I love the fact that they've got a system. They're identifying the things that they want to work on. So right now, Kevin wants to ramp it up with China, and that's fine because Besson said China's in a different bucket. I want to see progress, and I think they're making progress. And if India's the first one done, and South Korea's the second one done, and Japan's the third one done, I think that's very good news.
I'm challenged on what to ask you, Taylor, because there's a bunch of things I want to ask, but I heard you sort of commenting when Kevin was talking about the notion of delisting potentially Chinese companies here. We've always talked about access to this market as a privilege, one that doesn't belong to people who violate the rules in such a flagrant way.
I was joking because I just wrote one of my law school thesis, and I was thinking about you, Jackie, on Shein suing Temu here in the U.S. to take advantage of our Digital Markets Competition Authority under our copyright law. So again, you have 2 foreign Chinese companies here in the U.S. suing each other because they don't like the way the other one is doing copyright in the U.S. and the way the U.S. are buying consumers. So again, shows how integrated we all are and the way that they do have access to our laws and our technology. And Kevin, you talked about forced IP tech transfer and how if you want to go over to China, you are almost forced to do a joint venture with the government. If you're JP Morgan, you can't just go and open up a branch in China. You have to negotiate with the Chinese government. They have to be involved. That's the stuff that I think Americans, when we think about China, is different, so understand and can wrap their heads around when they just feel like they're playing a different game. We've talked about devaluing their currency, which is in a way not playing fair. You know, I think my only concern, Jackie, is when we think about raising revenue from tariffs, this comes back to me where then we can't think of it as zero tariffs and full fair trade. I mean, I don't think China ever plays fair. So we can't just go to the world and say, everyone do 0% tariffs, because we've talked about those non-tariff barriers. But if that's the end goal, then you can't raise revenue from it, because revenue from it means that we're keeping 20, 30%, whatever it is, tariffs. So I think I'm still trying to figure out what's the goal and where do we end up in all of this?
Yeah. I've said this before. I think I brought it up Friday. If you've read what President Trump has said in the past, and I'm not talking about that speech he gave in 2018 in Charleroi, Canada, he wants to keep a tariff in place on every nation with which we trade. And so he said, just to let's do the math on the numbers and put them in perspective. He made a comment about revenue from the tariffs, with it coming in, income taxes for Americans who make under $200,000 a year will be substantially reduced, maybe even completely eliminated. He has said things like that in the past. So this is rough math. The cutoff for the top 10%, so the bottom 90% of taxpayers in this country, that is roughly $180,000. So let's use that as the cutoff point. They pay, the top 10% pay 72% of the taxes. So you've got to come up with at least 28% of the total income, individual income tax revenue as an offset through tariff revenue. If you're going to have the bottom 90% pay no income taxes, you're just make the assumption we're not going to get a nickel from any of those taxpayers. We're talking about we're going to need annually $600 billion in revenue. Mm-hmm. So based on the math of, oh boy, we're making $16 billion in April in tariff revenue, that works out annualized to $192 billion per year. We as a nation will need more than 3 times that amount. If you need $600 billion in revenue, you're going to need an across-the-board tariff on every dollar of goods imported into the United States of 18%. So is that what the president is talking about?
Right.
Well, he had my understanding.
That is not sustainable. That will never happen.
But my understanding is that
18%?
he does envision having in place a tariff. And broadly speaking, from an economic perspective, it encourages work if you tax consumption. And let's just say it, this is a consumption tax. It is a tax on things that we consume that are bought overseas. And it encourages work. And it encourages us to work to make things here in the U.S. But I didn't mean to
I'm
interrupt
concerned about what I would call class warfare. When you take a huge segment of society and say, you don't have to pay tax, we're going to put that burden on either tariffs or the rest of the population here. Very uncool. Because all of a sudden, you're not contributing. You're not helping anybody out. You're not paying any tax whatsoever. I'd rather just see a flat tax of 19% or whatever it's got to be, and everybody pays it. It's not right. And tariffs, by the way, should be strategic. Not every country should we tariff. We may want to say to ourselves, China is the enemy, and they are. I don't care what anybody says. We need to spend billions defending the northern border of North America. That's actually Canada. We shouldn't tariff anything in Canada because they have all the stuff that China...
Order filled.
the minerals, the precious metals, the resources, all that crap that we're buying from China. We don't need to if we cut a deal with Canada. Why would we tariff that? Potash. Why do we want to tariff potash? Saskatchewan has all the potash. So I say zero tariffs on the strategic. And if you're not playing ball with us like India, okay, whack them with tariffs. But now when I hear India, and I love your idea, you know why the Indian deal's best first? You get to sell a Ford 150 into the rural area of India that you've never been able to sell in 20 years. 110% tariffs. I love that deal. So I say let's get more strategic, because Bessett said the same thing. Let's look at everyone on a bespoke basis. I like that. Now we're starting to fine-tune this tariff stuff. And that's why the market's already gained back 50% of what it lost on April 3rd. Today, we're 50% back.
I still believe that on the table, that what they're trying to negotiate away are the egregious tariffs on the side of the trading partners and non-tariff barriers and currency manipulation. I still believe there will be some small tariff in place with every trading partner.
I think you're right. It has to be if their model is going to work. Otherwise, to your point, the math definitely
It might not be
doesn't.
18%, but I bet you it's 10.
Yeah.